everyone, and welcome to your favorite YouTube series and our favorite YouTube series as well, because we are now doing our 22nd of these, guys, if you can believe it. So 22, I think that's pretty good. We are excited this week to have Palo Alto with us. As always, you see we've got Lloyd and Anthony and Aaron, the really bad security guys. We're going to be talking with Jeff Fort and Josh Zalonis about XDR technology today. And what I think is great about that is, you know, we always make a big deal about not using acronyms. And I was earlier thinking about XDR and I was like, I don't know the word that the X in XDR stands with. So even if I was to say it out, I'd be like, I don't know what to make of it. So with that, Jeff, I'm going to pass it over to you to do some introductions on your end. And then, Josh, if you could answer, what does the X in XDR mean? We got detection and response, but what the heck is the X? And go from there.
Well, I guess I'll just hop in and answer that real quick. You know, it's interesting because, you know, people were using the acronym like XDR, and nobody really had any idea what it meant. And some people were like, oh, it's X like in Xmas. And so, you know, the cross, and I have no idea where that was really coming from. I think it was created because the XDR happened first. So whenever I was looking at the market, and it was interesting because I was doing an EDR wave about a year and a half ago, and I needed to call it something. And so I came up with extended and tweeted out taking advantage of analyst privilege. And, you know, that's what analysts like to do, is name things. And so that's what I did, extended detection and response.
Extended, I like it, but you can't say the E because the E's already been taken. So we need more letters. We need more letters for our vegetable soup. To be fair,
there was a little bit of a hedge in there, because if the market didn't move toward XDR, we could still talk about extended detection and response as EDR.
Well done.
Very true.
Like
yes.
Yeah. And kind of how we got on this topic, Matt, was around Anthony kind of threw the gauntlet down to say, hey, XDR, EDR, it's three letters, potato. Yeah, with a vegetable theme, bad dad joke, but it's the same thing, right? There's no difference, and we kind of beg to differ there. At least our approach to XDR, and that's the purpose of why we're getting together. And from our team, you know, Josh is our CTO, one of our field CTOs, and we call him evangelist. He's out there preaching the gospel around XDR. And then Matt France and I'm the core rep here at Palo Alto Networks, covering Michigan, large Michigan accounts. Matt is my partner in crime and helping in the SE role. And then Art is our speedboat. Cortex, Art Hathaway is our speedboat, another acronym, our Cortex XDR expert. And Maddie is our inside salesperson. And I think Steve's on as well, and he's Art's engineer. So we got a motley crew here represented today.
Excellent.
People named Matt being the smart guys in the team. I don't know. It seems like it's a thing, but anyways, Jeff, this is
all right, so let's kick it off then. So Josh, tell me, kind of recap and talk about what is extended detection and response. What does that do for me? How is it different than EDR? And what do you need to really make use of it?
Absolutely. Well, it's funny, I'm a CTO and evangelist, but really I think my job's storyteller as much as anything. So let me go back to 2013 for me. And, you know, I'm sitting around with a buddy of mine, having drinks like you do. And we're talking about how to go and attack what was at that point the latest trend in threat detection, which was sandboxing. And we kept finding all these ways to go and bypass sandboxes. And there's so much complexity, you know, looking at it and trying to figure out, well, if you're trying to exploit something and you're trying to monitor it, like there's so many things that can go wrong. And so what you really need to do is monitor the actual target environment. And so for me, that was really whenever I started pivoting toward the EDR paradigm of let's take all the monitoring stuff that we have in these sandboxes and deploy it in the actual target environment. So it's not like we're going to be sitting here and if we're not able to get an indictment in the first 10 minutes of execution, then we're going to say it's okay. We're actually going to be monitoring it forever. And if you're running some weird edge case, some weird back version of Flash or something like that, that we're going to pick that up too. And so, it was the idea about collecting all the security relevant information that you could from an endpoint. And at this point, we were talking about end user compute. And what's interesting is that, over the past, I'm going to say 10 years, it's closer to 8, but, over the past 8 years, we've seen this develop into something that has been accepted by the market is really, if you're monitoring a system that is under attack, your best bet is to have really EDR deployed there. The challenge then becomes, how do you defend against endpoints that don't have, or that aren't under management? And this is a huge problem. I saw it all the time as an analyst. Like easily 10, 20% of any organization, their end user compute, their laptops and workstations don't have threat defense software, anti-malware solution, EDR, they're just unmanaged. And if one of those gets targeted, you don't know until they're moving somewhere else. And at that point, you're looking for lateral movement, and the complexity just starts going up and up and up. So what is the solution? And here's where, I always tell people it's fourth grade. I have no idea when I actually learned the definition of a line segment, but I think that it really tells the story of the evolution to XDR is that, and I can say XDR now because we explained it's extended detection and response. Yep. All right, see, I didn't get yelled at. But the evolution to XDR is really using the definition of a line segment. It is the portion of a line that connects two endpoints. And those endpoints, they no longer have to be your end user compute. It could be cloud assets, it could be workloads. And if you think about, and I often, because when I'm presenting, I just present straight out of my browser, and people can see the 30 to 80 tabs that I have at any given point in time. And I say, if you really look at it, my laptop that I'm presenting is one of those endpoints. And there's a network connection to each of those assets, and they're all cloud assets. Right. And so that's the other part of that line segment. It's the other end point. And so now we're evolving beyond endpoint being end user compute into anything that you're connecting to, and then trying to monitor that connection between that line segment. And once you're able to start stitching things together, then what you do is you've gotten to the point where you're no longer doing pattern-based behavioral detection on an endpoint that is isolated, like we're monitoring this particular endpoint and we detected something bad, and maybe even do a full root cause analysis or causality chain to tell you exactly what happened on that system. Now, because everything's tied together, we can tell you what is happening in the context of your environment. So your alerts should no longer be that this system had something happen. This is going on in your environment, and this is the full story of what's happened.
Oh, go ahead. You first, Anthony.
let me address the elephant in the room, right? Why XDR instead of SIM? Because what you told me is basically what my SIM is doing for me.
Is it?
Mine is.
How much time do you spend tuning your SIM?
Hardly any.
Really? Well, you have a magical SIM.
I do have a magical SIM, yeah.
What we find is that the correlation of events, and I'm going to pick on a particular use case that I'm aware of from the attack evaluation that so every year for the last 2 years. In the next few weeks, they're going to publish the third round. MITRE has published a enterprise attack evaluation. And last year, a SIM vendor participated in it. And the way the SIM vendor prepped for this was that they had to build over 200 custom rules to go through and be able to do the detections that they were able to perform. That is a lot of expertise. Mm-hmm. And so if we think about how we can optimize organizations, and we can call it automation or whatever you want to call it, but the idea here is that we as a vendor are taking that SIM paradigm, if you will, and instead of offloading the cost of building those detection rules onto you, that we're building that into the analytic capabilities of the product we're selling you. So much like, I'm going to make a joke here, and my former colleague Jeff Pollard, if he ever listens to this, is going to laugh. He always used to say MDR is just MSSP doing what it always should have done. There's a similarity here.
So I want to go back a little bit to where you talked about like the pattern recognition and everything else. Yes. I understand what you're saying about the cloud component, but I'm also worried that pattern behavior is still important in the cloud. And how are you getting that telemetry? This isn't accusatory. I'm trying to learn. How are you getting that telemetry data if there's no software on that particular cloud endpoint?
Right. Do I have to feed you like I do with SIM as well?
Well, one of the challenges, again, going back to picking on SIM, one of the challenges is you never know quite what you're going to be getting. And then there's the classic story about, oh, well, what happens whenever you get that bill and you're, oh, what log sources can I turn off? And then God help you if you turn the wrong ones off and then get breached. There's part of the paradigm that we're moving toward is providing agents that are going to be ensuring the collection of information that you need. And, that can be through our Prisma line of products, that can be through sending standard logs. I mean, to be fair, there's a real argument that can be made that none of the logs that are generated from an endpoint, let's just restrict this to Windows for a second. Sysmon gives you probably 90% of anything that a EDR agent is collecting and sending to you. On a Windows box, you also have the AMC interface for your to detect script execution. But beyond that, you really don't need much. And so the logs exist and are there, and you are going to have to be collecting them and sending them to the XDR data lake. But again, the paradigm is very close to SIM. We're just kind of getting you across the line to where you're not having to go and build your rule sets. And we're doing stitching and everything else. Right. There's quite a bit.
Where's the line then between, because this does sound like an MDR SIM type scenario, right? Where's the line?
Well, yeah, I mean, quite frankly, SIM doesn't do the level of correlation that XDR does. And I guess to demonstrate, we can take a look at EDR. Like, why has SIM never been great at endpoint detection? Because one of the things that I've said forever, I'm going to say, is that EDR is just a mini fridge SIM. Right? You're doing log aggregation and detection, and you're able to go query it. How is that not SIM?
Right. I understand what you're saying, but there's a big difference in the type of data that you can get from layer 7 as opposed to layer 2. And that's where we need, when I say we, like, Acrisures and Spectrums and everything else, we need to be able to start funneling through that alerts and getting more actionable intel, because we're seeing so many different types of threats, right? Like the threats we're seeing now are still the same old threats, but they're just being creative about getting in the front door or that lateral movement. And so you still have we still have to worry a lot about third party, right? Like we talked about it last year, CloudCon last year. My director talked about how it didn't come in through the traditional front door. So now knowing that and knowing things can come in from the cloud, if there's no agent on it, or if you're not looking at like a CASB, then how are you going to, I still don't agree with the throwing away the pattern recognition.
I apologize for speaking over you there.
No, you're fine. I do it all the time, so we're okay.
We have to do that all the time. Don't worry about it.
We're leveraging those technologies in order to generate and collect the data that is being fed into XDR, is the short answer.
Now,
we're not replacing those technologies. Those technologies are fantastic sources for XDR to be doing the analytics. Don't think about XDR, and certainly, let me say, don't think about EDR as being an endpoint solution. It's not. It's a cloud analytics solution.
Now, is it two-way? Because the other thing that the reason why I'm asking some of these questions is because I had just had a podcast on this a couple of weeks ago, and some of the topics are still fresh. One of the things that I was picking on McAfee about is when it comes to some of those alerting, I need it to be two-way. I need to be able to take direct action if I see this type of behavior, and that's where the importance still of that endpoint response, right? Because it is getting you data, but at the same time, I still need that endpoint software to do X, Y, or Z if I see the alert. So don't get me wrong, I love the concept of XDR. I'm like Anthony, we're proceeding with caution because it is that extra layer. It is the extra cost associated with it. And we have to balance between, we have budgets are finite. Unfortunately, this isn't like 2010 anymore. Like budgets are constricting. We need to be smarter with our budgets. So,
well, what I'm going to say is that from a EDR perspective and pushing a particular response or automating a response back onto a managed endpoint, that capability is there. But one of the differentiators that Palo Alto Networks has that nobody else in the XDR space is doing is that we have our own source solution. And so when you talk about having all those different...
an acronym, sorry. SOAR. SOAR. I was listening intently.
I was gonna do so well today. Security, automation, orchestration, and response. And I apologize, it's a horrible acronym, and it came from Gartner.
That's why we have them, as Matt likes.
Yeah.
Came from Gartner. Go figure.
Those are 4 bad words to put together. Like, that's a mouthful. So we get it, but we just like to explain it. So we can say SOAR.
Absolutely.
Sorry, go ahead, Josh.
Well, so the difference here is that we have a automation framework that enables you to create the responses and interactions with the technologies that you have in your environment. I'm going to take a step back and say that whenever I was initially defining the extended detection and response, or XDR space, one of the critical things that I included in there was that you had to be vendor agnostic, because that's what your customer environments look like. And so that is why
there's some real talk right there.
you need to have that SOAR layer that's built to go and interact with whatever other technologies that you have. And it's easier to deliver it that way than to try to start piling things on to an XDR solution that,
we're meant to be there.
To me that we have, at least in my perspective, a lot of overlap in as far as features, and what we're doing here. Because if let's say I have an EDR, right? And then I have a SIM and I have a SOAR, and all those things are, working in conjunction right now. And with XDR, you're kind of smushing them all together. But I still need those other solutions, right? I mean, I need a SIM for compliance requirements. So I'm just having difficulty, I guess, mostly with the overlap of, well, I'm already doing this already anyways.
In defense of them, though, that's the problem with half the security tools out there. There is so much overlap. We struggle with that all the time, right? You try and do a gap analysis between this solution, and this solution, because everybody's bleeding into each other. I guess here's your first softball question, Josh. We've asked you a couple tough questions. As promised, here's your first softball one. Does a hardware vendor like Palo Alto have an advantage over other solutions because you have the ability to look at the traffic at the switch level? And is in the Palo Alto world, do you guys have something similar like Cisco tetration? Sorry, I smushed two words together, which is another visibility component that really could be powerful in your XDR vision.
I'm going to take that softball question. It's opening day, so I guess we can do sports metaphors.
Yes, we could.
I'm going to take that somewhere else. And I'm going to tell you that Palo Alto Networks is not a hardware company.
You have hardware, though, that has data that can't be it's an advantage, right? Like you're getting valuable data because you have hardware in the environment.
Well,
that's what I mean. Sorry. I know your marketing people are cringing right now, but you guys are still hardware at the core, and that can be a valuable thing.
It's interesting because, coming from the analyst community, and I guess I haven't talked about my background yet, so let me just touch on that real quick. I joined Palo Alto Networks 6 months ago. Prior to that, I spent 4 years at Forrester, thus the Gartner jab midway through this session. But
I completely approve of that.
Yeah.
So what we have is a market advantage that you're talking about is very similar to a market advantage that Microsoft has. Getting into the EDR space and them with their Defender threat protection capability that
we all know how great that is. Yeah.
What's that?
We all know how great that is, right? Having that advantage. I mean, with I don't want to digress too much, but
you're digressing.
You definitely
keep going, Josh. I'm listening.
I'll say the biggest problem any endpoint vendor ever had isn't selling licenses; it's getting deployment. Microsoft solves that for the most part.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
In a Windows environment.
Yeah.
So yes, we have the same advantage from a network perspective. Absolutely. We're able to stitch everything together.
And I think that shouldn't be overlooked when it comes to XDR, right? Because that's why I got my heart palpitate a little bit when you're talking about having the behavioral analytics here and not there, because I think at that layer 2 level, while some people think, oh, that's just basic packet information, everything else, I can tell you from personal experience and watching awesome engineers that data is way more valuable than you think when it comes to lateral movement.
Yeah, we spent too much
if you
time
can push that data back up, that's where I was going with that, right? I was kind of leading you with that softball question, is then if you can push that data back out somewhere to be able to take action on it, hallelujah, right?
Well, absolutely. But the thing that I think that we need to kind of get into is, what is behavioral detection and what do you need to really do good behavioral detection? And I'm going to I have this kind of thought exercise that I walk people through sometimes where I say, are there any malicious operations that can happen that happen on a system?
I'm following.
And the answer is possibly, but generally no. If there was something that could happen or that was part of a system that only happened for bad, and probably the closest we're going to come to this is reading LSAS. Like you have Mimikatz reading from LSAS, you're going to have a bad time. Right. But, in general, in order to do a behavioral detection, you need to look at a pattern of behavior. You need to look at a sequence of events. And, it's kind of like that Among Us game where, as you're going through, different people are acting suspicious. And then over time, you figure out who the imposter is and you jet them out the airlock. Like, it's the same thing. Because there's no single event that is bad, you have to look at that pattern of suspicious behavior to make an indictment. Because the most dangerous thing that we can do is to impact the business. The most dangerous thing that we can do is to start responding automatically to things with low confidence. And I mean, I don't need to tell you what happens to those systems or how quick they get ripped out of the environment. So being able to go through and leverage technologies, the native technologies, you're talking about, a switch, any kind of detections that you're getting from that are informing that, hey, this is suspicious behavior that we're seeing. And then as you're able to build context around it, from an analytic perspective, and hopefully very quickly, you're going to look at that pattern. You're going to have all that log data, and it's going to be centralized, much like the SIM use case. Now, we talked about compliance and SIM earlier, and that's something that I actually published a blog last week on, talking about how that is something that XDR is going to have to do at some point. But let me tell you something.
Yep. Is your development team on the call? We need to get them a copy of this, because what you said is absolutely correct.
Right. We can't have people paying consumption costs twice. And one of the benefits that we have is that a lot of the logs that you're sending to your SIM are network logs. So again, that's a huge advantage for us.
All right, here's some as Aaron would say, some real talk. And this is a radical question. So if you think that your people are going to cringe by answering it, don't. Do you think that XDR will one day be able to replace SIM?
Yes.
All right.
I think in theory,
but when that happens, will it be called SIM?
No, it'll get a new acronym from Gardner. Uh-oh.
And a whole
I have a Gardner rep. I'm in the doghouse now.
Well, I kind of wonder, I mean, I think about that sometimes because we talk a lot about the disparity of all these different systems and these security tools and, people looking in different places. And now we're talking more and more about pulling all of this stuff together. Like, I think that's a great point, because at some point, does something completely different and more unified spring out of all of these different systems that we've had running? So I think that's kind of a fascinating thought process to go down, right? I mean, at the end of this, does something completely new and different emerge? I kind of hope so in some regards, right? At least. And I mean, I think all the vendors that are associated in there can certainly be a part of that. But, I think for teams that are struggling with the amount of people that they have and the amount of alerts that are coming in and the multiple different places that they're having to go and look for stuff, and how many things are falling through the gaps because they have 10 different places to look for things that aren't talking with each other. Out of that has to come something better, considering how much more sophisticated the attacks are continuing to be. I feel like right now the attackers are way more sophisticated than most companies' security stacks are.
Well, absolutely.
Wow,
Thanks, Matt.
that's a major revelation,
Yeah.
Mr. President.
You know that part of
I mean, I don't mean better. I mean more sophisticated, right? I mean, and we're talking, I mean, companies have spent millions of dollars thinking that they're buying sophisticated advanced security technologies. And yet the attackers always seem to be one step ahead. Now, we've talked a lot about the reasons for that, but out of all of that, doesn't something have to come out of that balances that out a little bit? And that was the point I was trying to make. I'll shut up now. Or is that the path? I mean, I guess, is that the path that you're seeing XDR heading down? That's a more integrated look into your environment?
Well, you know, I think about the people, processes, and technology paradigm, right? That the SOC is built with all of them. And I hear a lot of talk about things like alert fatigue or having trouble hiring the right people and things like that. And I often think that by up-leveling the processes or the technology or the people, that you're improving the state of the SOC itself. And I don't think that that's any kind of groundbreaking thought process, but
You're speaking the truth, though.
But what happens is that if we are identifying people as a potential choke point, we need to understand why that is. You highlighted a couple of the things. One, we have a ton of technology that's going on that we need to, you know, take a look at, you know, what's the integration. There's no integration. I mean, you can send all the logs to a SIM.
You are preaching to the choir right now.
You can send all the logs to the SIM, but you know, a few queries later, you're back in Microsoft Excel trying to go and do the pivots to go and figure out what actually happened.
Exactly right. Yeah.
So the goal of XDR is to stitch all those different telemetry sources together so that you're able to see without having to do all those queries. You know, I mean, look, the quality of analytics is mind-blowing. To think about the libraries that you can just download in Python, just to throw something out there, you know, to go and get to some kind of, you know, machine learning capability. I mean, hell, I'm barely a developer, and I've written stuff using random forests and, you know, and Python scripting and doing stuff like that. Now, and I'm like the lowest common denominator here. So, you know, it's what we're able to do in 2021 with analytics to go through and stitch things together and then be able to build those contextual detections, the pattern-based behavioral detections is really solving a huge part of the technology side that has been this giant snowball rolling down the hill, you know, with all the analysts doing their best to kind of prop it up. And the problem is that because they've had poorly integrated products, they have manual processes. And so, of course, your people are the problem, but your people aren't really the weakest link in this chain. They're just the people who are suffering the most. And so if we can fix the technology and use things like a SOAR in order to go and build automation to help make you more effective, make you faster, more agile in your responses, then we've made your people better.
That's why one of the hottest jobs in cyber right now is data scientist, because it's at the end of the day, when you're throwing logs and, you know, and telemetry and packets, and it's all, at the end of the day, it's all about your algorithm. Who's got the better algo, right? to crunch my data, spit out the behavior that is malicious, not malicious, as you previously discussed, and give me that alert that's actionable when I need to.
So then,
do you think? Sorry, this is another one along those lines. Do you think? And I know a colleague of mine, Chris Roberts, has been railing on this for a while. Do you think it's time for there to be a universal API in security? Like, you talk about the different integration pain points, but do you think it's time that there just needs to be an API? It's this structure, JSON format, it at least has these minimum data points, and every security vendor needs to be able to ingest it and export it. Would that help mature the XDR concept?
That exists in some places, for instance, FileBeats. So you do have some places where that's starting to happen, but realistically, the challenge that is always going to run into is that the next time somebody thinks they're a little ahead of the innovation curve and they have another piece of data that needs to be handled by that API is out of date. And
I
it's
see what you're saying, but it's almost like people, and we're just as guilty, not just vendors, but us analysts, we're guilty of that. But when it boils back down and you go read the the post incident reports and everything else, the data is basically still the same. It's still the same. Like, we're to your point, we're almost our worst enemies, aren't we?
So then let's go back to XDR and say that is really what is happening right now. That instead of it being a API that every vendor in the world has to suddenly adopt and spend their engineering time in order to go and build out those connections and stuff, that XDR's really in a foot race with everybody that's in the XDR space to get that critical mass of integrations so that the industry doesn't have to agree to it. If we think about it, I mean, how many different firewall companies are you running in your network? Four, probably at most. More than one.
You're not lying, because this Jeff, close your ears. This is going to sound like I'm picking on the hardware industry, and I kind of am, but I don't mean it in a bad way. The problem is when you have all the similar equipment that's doing basically the same thing, then you're relying on what's the differentiator, it's software, right? It's the extra things that you can do. So you have something like a load balancer that was traditionally this, now it can do WAF. Not saying that's bad. That can be a good thing. But to Anthony's point, we're losing our minds because, okay, where's the overlap and how do you get it? And maybe that's where XDR, maybe that's where we meaning the companies, have to start thinking differently, because maybe XDR is like the translator. Maybe we rely on your solution to know Perl, to know PHP, to know ASP. So to your point, we can consume XML, we can consume JSON, like bring us your poor and tired and whatever the Statue of Liberty thing is.
Send me your logs. Yeah.
Send me your logs.
I like that.
It really is about having a central repository that's able to ingest all these log sources, be able to stitch them together, much the same way as you could use create process on a system in order to reconstruct a process tree. Being able to go through and look at the IPC level, and IPCs can be name pipes. You can go and you can use do something like process injection in order to interact with another part of the process tree on the system, or it can be a socket to a web service. And being able to go and build is, of course, the ideal is to have both of those endpoints and the line segment, but a lot of the time you won't. You're only going to have part of it. But if you have two pieces of that puzzle, especially, you know, the network being the connective tissue, you know, yay us, as you mentioned, Aaron, like it's, if you're able to do that, then hopefully we're going to make your life easier. And we're doing so not just because we're bringing everything together, like aggregation wise, but because we're going and we're productizing the detection capabilities, that we're productizing the ability to go through and do the analytics to help build a causality chain so that when you get an alert somewhere, you can see everything that's related to it and understand that the reason why you detected this connection out to some weird web host somewhere, you know, out on the war zone, that you can see that that actually came from this particular endpoint that, you know, that executed this, you know, PowerShell out of a Word document.
Yep. Because I can give you a pink unicorn use case from the real world that backs you up on that. So when we were doing a firewall upgrade project and we went to default deny and we had to look at different unusual behaviors, we actually had a situation to where there was a imaging radiology device that was legacy by the company Kodak. Right. So now we have a situation where we have a tool in the environment that's working. We saw it phoning home. At first, we're like, oh, crap. Why is a recording device phoning home? Right. But after some intensive search and checking and everything else, that human element, we would find out that that particular device was trying to phone home to New York. But what we didn't know until we investigate a little bit more is the IP that it was trying to connect to used to belong to Kodak Eastman or Eastman Kodak, whichever way it was, right? So then that was owned by like AT&T or something, and then it was repurposed to this printing company. So you have a situation where, oh my gosh, we have an infected imaging system device. It's phoning home to New York to some printer who's probably printing company who's taken over. It's got you go through all these different paths, and then you start putting the pieces together. Like, wait a minute, Eastman Kodak went out of business about 3 or 4 years ago. They've repurposed that IP address. All of this device was doing was phoning home. Hey, do you have any new updates? Yep. No, phoning home. So it was just trying to connect home to a system that doesn't exist anymore. So that's where I think the power of XDR can come in, is if you can help us figure out faster that wasn't malicious, right? I mean, the XDR is not going to know that Eastman Kodak went out of business, but I mean, do you see where I'm going with that use case?
Well, absolutely. And hopefully, but see, at the same time, that's something that from a network detection perspective, when you're looking at it, what is special about XDR for that particular use case? I mean, I could talk about another example, how we stopped the SolarWinds attack. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but in October,
we might have heard about it.
You what?
We might have heard about SolarWinds.
No, about stopping the attack. I want to hear about that part.
Yeah, go ahead.
But we were at Palo Alto Networks was actually attacked and had to declare a major incident, bring in third-party IR to go and help with an investigation. We had one of our Orion servers downloaded Cobalt Strike.
Oh,
and
ouch.
That's fun, right? Except the fact that our
makes for a long day.
So what's interesting is that our XDR agent was able to detect the creation of Cobalt Strike does some different things with named pipes whenever it's setting itself up, detected that, shut the whole thing down, and then generated an alert. Now, of course, anytime Cobalt Strike gets downloaded in your environment, that is a major incident. And so we had to go through a whole
an expensive exercise. Let's just put it that way.
The pain was real, but you know, it's, you know, that was interesting. And, you know, that's October. I joined in August. And so for me, looking at that, I was like, woohoo, I made the right decision, right? I mean, as far as I know, we're the only company that actually detected and stopped that attack. And that is,
I think what I think I love about that story is, you know, we talk a lot about how things are going to happen. You know, perimeters are going to be breached, whatever perimeter means anymore. People are going to get in one way or another, or a million different ways. What happens when they do? How quickly can you stop something or find something when they're in? Because they're going to get in. So I love that story because it says, well, hey, here is something that got in, and we're admitting it got in, but we were able to stop it and know that it was there immediately once it started doing something. So I think that's a pretty powerful story.
I think we just created something in this meeting called defense in depth. Let's start messaging that out. Defense in depth. You guys heard it first right here. We just came up with
Aaron, get out of here.
We are totally innovative.
We can, I got it. We can start using pictures of medieval castles and start talking about the layers of defense that they had to build.
Good stuff. Well, looking at the clock, Josh, I think you took more hard questions than anyone has ever had to deal with in any episode of Not Another Demo.
You did phenomenal.
Honestly,
we were texting each other, Josh.
Thank you very much. Conversations. Yeah, this is exactly the types of conversations that I think are super important for all of us to be having with vendors and partners and all of us together, right? So this is exactly what I have always hoped that this program would be. So thank you, one, for putting up with us, and two, handling it incredibly well. So I think this was a great conversation. If anyone that's watching is interested in looking at Palo Alto's XDR solutions, we'll have some contact information in the details of the video. Please, all of you, like and subscribe and share and click the bell and all that fun YouTube stuff. And Palo team, thank you so much, all of you, for being here. Guys, good job as always. And we'll see everybody for episode 23. Thanks, everyone.